Hello, today we're going to see how João Vieira managed to win his 4th WSOP bracelet in the 100k high roller. He is number 1 on Portuguese all-time money list, and this 2.6 million prize was his second best lifetime score, and now he has a total of $21 million in life earnings. Our first hand starts with an open from the cutoff with King 10 off. He can open here with around a third of his hands. On one hand, as a big stack, he can put a lot of pressure on 20 BB stacks on blinds who cannot play back too much, while there is one player with around 10 bigs. On the other hand, he has a chip leader on the button, so he cannot go too crazy. The Armenian player called with Queen Jack suited, and this is also okay. We can see that he can use his positional advantage and ICM pressure, and he can continue with even wider range than open raiser, calling with around a quarter of hands and raising the next 12%. Queen Jack suited can do both, but the solver prefers to raise it with a high frequency. On the flop, João c-bet for around a quarter of the pot, and we can see that this is acceptable play, but overall this isn't a great board to c-bet at all, as the solver does that only around 18% of the time, using mostly this small sizing. On this board, both players have similar equity and almost equal share of very strong hands, and in this kind of scenario the advantage comes from playing in position. Aram called this bet, and this is no surprise, but we can see that this hand is worth a raise some portion of the time, and what is more surprising, solver hates folding in position against a small sizing and continues with all sort of weird hands like 8-6 of diamonds that has almost no equity but can be used to take the pot on later streets. I doubt many human players would be that sticky, so that makes this c-bet a little bit better. Ace on the turn is a great card for João, as he has more of them in his range. This is the best card in the deck to continue barreling, as he did for around 70% of the pot. We can see that solver with King 10 off uses all possible sizings, but it prefers to bet even bigger, and the overbet is the most used one. When we look closer at different combos of this hand, we can clearly see that having a spade is very important, as these types of hands are great to bluff when the third spade would come on the river. The Armenian player folded, and we can see that despite having a pretty strong hand, the solver also mixes folds with calls on this turn. This hand is just awful to play against the third barrel, as it's very hard to improve. We can also see that it's better to call second pairs with weaker kicker, like Queen 7 or Queen 6, because with a jack we block a lot of possible bluffs, and our kicker doesn't matter in a scenario where we beat only bluffs. This hand takes place with 5 players remaining, and our hero is sitting in an ICM cage. He has third stack, there are 2 short stack with around 10 big blinds, so he has a huge gap on them, and the chip leader has position on him. This is a scenario where he should play very tight and carefully, and we can see that his limp, even with the one of the strongest hands, is a standard play in this scenario. He can call with around half of his hands, and the solver isn't raising at all. Oganian has 10-6 off and decided to raise. He should have polarized strategy here and raise only the best hands and a lot of offsuit trash, but despite being a chip leader in position, he can't go nuts in this situation because he is against a relatively strong and uncapped range, but we can see that 10-6 off is perfectly fine here. João check-raised his ace-king, and this is a nice idea to punish an aggressive opponent, but this is also a small mistake, as the solver prefers to just go all in with this hand. We can see that only hands worth doing it for value are kings, aces and ace-king suited, as it's not a spot where he wants to induce, for example, some action with lower pairs. The Armenian player of course folded, as he was on the bottom of his range, and Vieira chipped up on a chip leader. Next hand took place shortly after, so we have a similar stack distribution, but this time our hero is sitting on the button. Hand starts with Thomas Boivin opening 10-9 suited from under the gun, and it's an okay open, but we can see that this is on the bottom of the range, and solver actually starts to fold this hand some portion of the time, as this type of hands can't stand too much heat against re-raise, and there are 2 reshoving stacks and 2 big stacks that can punish wide opening range. Action folded to João on the button, and he made a quick use of his just earned chips, as he decided to 3-bet ace-3 suited in position. Both players have almost the same amount of chips, so the bubble factor between them is very high. This isn't a spot to go nuts and reopen the action, because João cannot call many 4-bets, but having an ace blocker is key in this situation, and we can see that almost all low aces, from ace-deuce to ace-9, are taking this aggressive action. Thomas Boivin has a pretty nice hand, and the sizing of the 3-bet is pretty small, as it's less than 3x, but because of ICM pressure, folding it is the best option with this hand. We can see that even pocket jacks are weak in this situation and are folded by the solver more often than not, And only hands that want to 4-bet for value are ace-kings, kings and aces, and most of the bluffs, same as for 3-betting player, come from low-suited aces. Next hand takes place in the next orbit, so stacks are still very similar, but this time, thanks to the last 3-bet, Vieira took Boivin in the standings and now is covering him. This time Thomas raised with ace-5 suited. This is a little bit better hand than 10-9, as in this scenario there is a big chance that he will not see the flop, so having key ace blocker is much more important than playability post-flop. João Vieira has king-jack and 3-bet from the button. This is a very similar scenario, and this hand is a little bit too wide as the solver just folds it, but the EV loss on this play is minimal, so this can't be that bad. If he is expecting Thomas to overfold just a little bit or chip leader to not 4-bet enough, then this might be a good adjustment. Solver is bluffing mostly with suited aces and some low suited kings. Having a king is good because it blocks top of the range, and having a low card in this scenario is better than a jack because it unblocks hands like queen jack, king jack, ace jack or jack 10 that are in UTG opening range and will just fold to a 3-bet. Boivin folded his ace-5 suited, and this is acceptable, but we can clearly see that this is one of the prime candidates to 4-bet bluff with a very high frequency. If he is not willing to take this spot with a perfect hand, then we can confirm that 3-bet with king jack was a good idea. The last hand comes from the heads-up play and starts with a limp with queen 10 off. We have to remember that this is a very specific structure. Usually in heads-up play there is only 1.5 big blind in the pot, but in this tournament setting with big blind ante the pot is already 2.5 BB. Because of that, small blind, who is also a button and will play post-flop in position, has a great price to continue, and in this setting he shouldn't fold any hands. Solver mixes between calls and raises with around 55% calls to 45% raises, and this specific hand is also using almost 50-50 split. Aram raised this limp, and there are also a few things to unpack here. The first thing is sizing, and you often don't see that big of an isolation out of position. To be honest, I don't know what is a GTO sizing on these stacks with big blind ante in play, but 7x looks a bit excessive. If he would ISO for 3.5x, then he should do it with around 40% of range, and that would be a depolarized range that includes all best playable hands, and that is because he would give the small blind player a great odds to call and can't expect many folds from him. With a strategy that raises to 7 big blinds, he can't go that wide, but still should raise with around 30% of hands. But this range looks different, as it should be much more polarized, with all the best hands that are willing to stack off and some offsuit trash. All wheel aces are too good to raise as a bluff and too weak to raise for value, and the solver checks them back. To analyze this spot post-flop, I made up custom ranges that include all offsuit aces and have GTO frequencies, and they look something like this. Flop comes ace-jack 7 rainbow, and it's a great one for Aram as he has a huge nut and equity advantage. He bet as he should, but this sizing choice isn't great. With few different options, solver almost always uses half pot bet to play this as a 2-street hand on such low SPR. There are many gut shots on this board, and it doesn't want to give great odds or any room for the small blind to outplay him on later streets. In another scenario where I gave him only the ability to bet for a quarter of the pot or to go all in, then the solver is still betting with almost full frequency, but with the lowest aces it just wants to overbet jam them on the flop. Vieira called with his gut shot, and we can see that this is a GTO play, and against this small sizing he should only fold less than 15% of range. 3 of diamonds on the turn is a total brick, and Aram continued again for a small sizing. And again, with this hand this isn't the best play. If we lock him to only bet small or check, then the solver checks most of ace-deuce off, and when we give it an option to go all in, then it jams this hand. The Portuguese player called, and when I saw this hand for the first time, I thought that it can't be good to chase this gut shot with such a low SPR. But the solver again proved me wrong, and it calls with it against a small bet 100% of the time, so very well played by João. If Aram would jam his hand on the turn, then this would be an easy fold. After king of spades on the river, Oganian went all in, and again, this wasn't the best play according to the solver. We can see that it doesn't like to jam the worst aces because it's hard to get called by many worse hands, and uses this with kicker below 7 as a check to maybe catch a bluff. This was a lucky river, but as they say, fortune favors the brave, and in GTO world he was the one that played this hand perfectly. And Aram made some questionable plays on every street and got punished by it. Thank you for watching, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see you next time. Bye.